Half-Life is widely regarded by critics and gamers alike to be one of the most influential PC games ever to be released. Its use of the typical run-and-gun FPS formula, in combination with its well-crafted story and detailed level design, made for a unique and innovative yet familiar experience. Receiving critical acclaim with near-perfect scores, it launched Valve into mainstream success in the PC gaming industry. But alongside the popularity of PC gaming, the home console was a fast-growing sector of this industry for 3D titles, one that Valve had yet to step into, which brings us to the topic of this video. Today let's take a look back at Half-Life's 2001 PlayStation 2 version and what made it such a unique and overall very impressive port. Of course, it's not uncommon for games in today's day and age to see releases across multiple different platforms, but 1999 was a very different time. Despite this, Valve would still try and look to have their smash hit title be accessible to players on different platforms. Originally, Valve had a macOS port slated for release in 2001, but was cancelled due to its overall quality not stacking up to the original. Meanwhile, Gearbox Software and Captivation Digital had been developing a port for Half-Life for the original Sega Dreamcast, set to release in 2001. The port would feature new character models, textures, and an exclusive expansion titled Half-Life Blue Shift. But following Sega's decision to discontinue the Dreamcast in March of 2001, the Half-Life port would be cancelled mere weeks before its release. Sierra Entertainment stated the decision was made due to changing market conditions, and the Dreamcast faded into the background in favor of its competition. Although this Dreamcast version was never officially released, it would be leaked later on and can actually still be played, but even the early review copies that were sent out received mixed feedback due to long load times and inconsistent frame rates. The Blue Shift expansion would later be ported over to the PC version, of course, but not all was lost, as some of what was developed for the Dreamcast would be reused for another project, a Half-Life port for the PS2. The Sony PlayStation 2 is widely regarded by many to be one of the best consoles of all time, and for good reason. With an expansive library of great games as well as some very advanced hardware, it ultimately became the best-selling home console of all time, and still holds that title today. So it came as no surprise that Sierra Entertainment would set their sights on the ever-popular console for one of their most successful publishing accomplishments. Developers at Gearbox Software were tasked with creation of the PS2 port, not only because of their previous work on the Opposing Force expansion from 1999, but also their work on the cancelled Dreamcast version. Sierra stated in an IGN interview that the PS2 version was to feature the same updated assets from the Dreamcast, as well as its own exclusive co-op mode that could be played split-screen, later known as Half-Life Decay. But it wasn't just these new features on their own that would make the PS2 port so impressive for Half-Life. Porting a game from one platform to another isn't so simple, especially not in 2001, and especially not for the PlayStation. The PS2 was widely known for being difficult to develop games for due to its complex hardware architecture. The core of the console was its CPU they titled Emotion Engine, which was made by Sony in conjunction with Toshiba. It was praised for how advanced it was at the time, but proved to have its downsides as well. The PlayStation was set up to handle its processing in a pretty different way than a traditional computer. The various parts of games that were running on the console were delegated to different hardware components for performance and optimization, each of these components possessing different capabilities. This is on top of the fact that it had less memory overall to work with than the average computer at the time. The console itself was both powerful and advanced in its own right, but its unconventional design made it somewhat unintuitive to work with, which is what makes this port, amongst many others, that much more impressive. If we compare this to the original Xbox, which would release later on in competition with the PS2, and Microsoft's console much more closely resembled a normal PC. In fact, it kind of was. The CPU was just a modified Intel Pentium 3, and its operating system was built straight off of Windows NT. But at this point, the Xbox wasn't out yet, and the Dreamcast was fading away, along with Sega's console business, which practically had 1 foot in the grave and 3 feet on a banana peel.
His dad's got 1 foot in the grave and 3 feet on a banana peel.
So the PS2 was pretty much it. But moving back to Half-Life here, and naturally, the biggest question when it comes to a console port is, how does it compare overall to the original? And as for Half-Life's port, it's actually seamless. The game still runs on the Gold Source engine, albeit heavily modified to be able to run effectively on the PS2, keeping the same gameplay feeling and visuals from its original version. It ultimately looks and feels exactly like Half-Life. Here's the thing, I actually do own a copy of Half-Life as well as an old fat PS2, but unfortunately the disc no longer reads, and on top of that, I wouldn't have any way of recording it, so admittedly I am using emulation to make this all possible, as well as record in a higher resolution from now on. But of course it would be ludicrous to not use a controller. And I'll be honest, playing a Gold Source game on a controller feels kinda stupid coming from a keyboard, but it all works as intended without issue. Just don't expect to be doing any bunny hopping. The typical console auto-aim features are here for both combat and activating things in the environment, which helps with the flow of gameplay. Alongside this, they made the choice to slow Gordon's movement speed slightly, which is definitely a good thing for playing with a controller. It's not uncommon for console ports of games to cut out certain sections from their PC counterparts due to performance or file size, but this port is luckily not one of them. All the levels, gameplay events, dialogue, NPCs, weapons, and more that you would be used to seeing in the PC version of Half-Life are all here on the PS2 version as well. And technically, it was actually an upgrade for the time. Not only did the port feature the exclusive co-op mode we spoke about before, it also came with the higher quality models, textures, visual effects, and some new dynamic lighting that weren't present in Half-Life's PC version at the time. The Windows version would receive its HD update in 2001 with the release of Half-Life Blue Shift, bringing over these high-quality assets, just apparently with a slight downgrade in terms of the overall poly count. On the performance side of things, well, I am using an emulator, and I think my RTX 3060 Ti meets the minimum requirements here, so I can't exactly show what performance can be expected natively. But I can speak firsthand from playing it on the PS2 before, and it ran pretty much as one would expect for a PS2 title from 2001. Overall, it runs fine with minimal hitching. The only time you would receive a drop in performance was in the heavier chapters like Surface Tension and maybe some of the later parts of the game when you get onto Zen. But even then, the fact that all this is running on a PlayStation 2 is a technical feat in and of itself, and although I didn't get to play Decay on the PS2 version in its traditional fashion, there was a community-made mod for Half-Life Decay on Steam, and from my experience with that, I was actually pleasantly surprised. It makes clever use of Half-Life's traditional storytelling and puzzle environments, allowing for players to work together to get through the levels. It's a unique experience and obviously lent itself to the split-screen co-op nature of consoles. Onto the graphical side of things, the port technically was a visual upgrade in many ways to the PC, as I stated before. They're still mostly the same overall with the exception of the higher quality assets. But if you compare both the current versions at the time, you wouldn't notice a massive difference, mainly due to the way the game was rendered on the PS2, which is the only real shortcoming of the visuals in this version. The combination of the lower resolution that was forced on the console, coupled with the limited resources compared to PC, created a lot of those jagged and wobbly edges. Although the PS2 supported anti-aliasing, apparently there were many games that didn't utilize it for performance reasons, and I suspect Half-Life was maybe one of these. This wasn't at all uncommon for console games of the time, let alone one of this scale, and honestly it's never really been something that's bothered me personally. Even though the PC version of Half-Life is easily the most well-known, this PlayStation 2 version was still well received and praised for the time. Half-Life itself already brought a fresh take on FPS games for PC, and bringing all of this innovation over to the PS2 with such little compromise only made it better. Truth be told, I wish there was more I could unearth about this version, but it's hard enough to find information on it as it is. Nonetheless, it stands as an innovative, ambitious, and I'd say overall one of the best PlayStation 2 ports of all time.